Firstly, we've got Queensland signalling it wants to scrap hotel quarantine altogether if these two get off the ground. Now, we know that sometime before this would actually occur in terms of construction, but do you think that's where we're headed? Do you think this is where the states are really pushing for now to get rid of hotel quarantine?
Look, I think it makes perfect sense to have a purpose-built quarantine centre. Hotels have been an ad hoc and should have always been a temporary arrangement. And I might point out that this is in response to basically a failure by the federal government. We're 18 months into a pandemic. We have a responsibility to bring Australians home who are in difficult circumstances overseas. That has to be done in an orderly and safe way. And the federal government has just absolutely failed in relation to the quarantine process and, of course, the vaccine rollout. The two jobs they were asked to do, they've managed to make just a shambles of.
Well, on that, with the responsibility to bring Australians home, do you think they shouldn't have slashed those travel caps?
Well, the difficulty is we are in the situation that we are in because of a lack of proper quarantine facilities. This is something that should have been addressed 12 months ago, hasn't been addressed, and we now see the Queensland government responding with their own plan, just as we've seen Victoria respond in relation to vaccines by embarking on a program to be able to produce locally the mRNA vaccine. So states have borne a huge amount of responsibility in relation to dealing with the pandemic, with lockdowns, with border restrictions. Many of them have done a really good job. The two things the Commonwealth were supposed to do have failed us, and there's been huge economic consequence to that and huge health consequence to that.
Senator, this four-phase plan produced from National Cabinet, it all hinges on vaccinations. We, of course, are awaiting those targets, but should that number be on how many people are vaccinated or how many people are offered it?
Oh, well, so the difficulty here again is we've got a fourth-stage plan that just looks like a marketing plan. We saw initially Scott Morrison set targets in relation to vaccines. Then he lifted the targets. There were no targets. Now he brings back a plan that doesn't have any timelines associated with it and doesn't have any targets with it. So it's very difficult to understand exactly what he's trying to achieve. It just looks like marketing spin to me. Part of the big problem here is we've had massive secrecy associated with everything to do with things like quarantine and the vaccine rollout because the Prime Minister decided to call the intergovernmental group where the premiers meet, a National Cabinet, wrapped a secrecy blanket over it. And that's been part of the problem because there's been no contestability in relation to the plans that have been developed. The government has to open up, has to be transparent, has to lay everything out on the table, and it is proper to set targets. Normally you would sit down and you would develop a plan, apply some contingencies to that plan. You would then ensure you have fallbacks for critical parts of the plan. None of that appears to have been done in this instance.
So would you like to see, though, those targets, once set, be on availability of the vaccine or uptake of it?
Well, I think either doesn't really matter. Ultimately, what we need to have is a population that is largely vaccinated. Now, that, of course, depends on the ability to be able to supply the vaccines. That's where we've had huge problems to date. And they're all interrelated. There are a number of people I've spoken to are simply unwilling to get AstraZeneca because of fears of clotting. And look, that's a personal choice. The availability of the Pfizer vaccine or the mRNA vaccine will help in that regard. All of these things are interrelated. The end game here is to make sure that we have a population that is largely vaccinated so that we don't have to have lockdowns, so that if there is an outbreak, it will be mild or it will involve far fewer people being put into intensive care. That's the aim.
Is it good enough that under 40s don't know when they'll be able to access the Pfizer vaccine? Should that be part of this timeline that they actually can get a firm date?
Oh, absolutely. And again, everything's been wrapped up in secrecy. Look, I understand when we enter into negotiations, during the negotiation phase, there may be some need for secrecy, but once contracts are signed, once agreements have been made, then we should be basically informing the public as to exactly what are in those agreements. We ought to know when the supplies are arriving. It's very, very simple logistics. And the government, again, has just been totally secret on this and unnecessarily secret.